Welcome to Tanked Up, the podcast all about craft beer and video games. It's episode 327. I'm your host Adil, and I'm once again joined by Bitrock Gaming's Chad and Curtis McKinney. Hey guys.
Hey, I'm really happy to be back. Feels like it's been forever, but it feels like coming home.
How have you been since we last spoke?
It's been good actually. I've been decompressing, since the game came out. I've been drinking a little. I've been pre-gaming, as we call it in the States.
Yes. I actually think all three of us are a beer in before we even started recording.
Amazing.
That's true. I mean, I could have used with a little bit more time away from Curtis, but it's nice to see him again.
Well, let's start with Curtis this time. What's your beer choice for this?
I think we should start with Chad. Actually, I have to go grab. I neglected to bring. I'm doing bad here.
No worries.
Let me go get my beer.
All right. Well, right fair enough. Chad, you're back in the hot seat.
What am I doing? Sorry.
What beer are you drinking?
I don't have a second beer, actually.
Oh. Oh, man. I thought running straight through episode to episode recording was going to be smooth transitions, and then I failed miserably. I should have done the heads up. In which case, while we're filling time, favorite beer you've had recently?
Ooh. Yeah, I would say probably the one that I've had recently that's been notable is the Black Hearted Ale. So I mentioned I got this collection of Bell's kind of variations on the Two-Hearted Ales, and one of them was the one I had just before, which is the Light-Hearted Ale, which is the more kind of sessionable version, and then there was also included in that collection the Black Hearted Ale, which is their Black IPA kind of take on it. And I mean, I wouldn't say it's my favorite Black IPA. I think that probably goes to I've had so many, but one of them that pops up in my head for sure is Stone's Black IPA, which is phenomenal. But it was a great Black IPA, and it's I would say got this nice toasty roast flavor that kind of dark and intense, but balanced by the really strong resiny and piney hop flavor, and a really good balanced mouthfeel. It's not too sweet. It's a little bit, I would say, mid to dry, but still heavy malt flavor. I love black IPAs. I wish more people would make them.
See, I love the concept, and I think I'm gonna have to hit you up for suggestions and see if I can get them here, because I haven't met very many black IPAs that follow through on the promise of a black IPA. Often I feel like for you saying it's got the roasted maltiness and it's balanced off by like a hoppy pininess sounds luxurious, but I so often do I get black IPAs that just don't do the IPA part, or kind of just taste like IPAs that happen to be dark. And I right, yeah. I love stouts. I'm probably the resident stout porter of the Tanked Up crew, and black IPAs consistently, or it's very easy for a black IPA to be oh, but you could have just had one of these really roasted, nice, heartier dark beers. And it's not like I just want stouts. It's more of, like I said, I want the balance. What I don't need is more stouts that taste watery.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good point, and I think it points to, the difficulty in making that style. It's a balancing act, and you either get a kind of muddled IPA, or rather, it's possible to either get a muddled IPA or a watered down stout, right? Because there's lots of stouts that are hop forward, that are big and robust, but balanced because of their aggressive hopping. I think the trick with a black IPA is to recognize the IPA framework that you're trying to capture, as well as the stout, and what properties of both you're trying to retain. And to me, the best black IPAs are retaining the, I would say, somewhat dryness of a more like West Coast IPA, with it being very hop forward and bitter, but allowing the roastiness to come through from the stout. Because the nice thing, and just to get into a little bit of the mechanics of brewing or the art of brewing, really, malts. There's a diversity of malts, and some malts, I would say, have a stronger flavor to them than their contribution to the sugar content. And roasted malts are indeed that. Like the amount of like a very dark roasted malt you have to add into the recipe to make it taste like stout is much smaller than the amount of base grain.
Mm-hmm.
So the nice thing about that is that you can actually capture a lot of that essence of a stout without overly contributing to the maltiness and the sweetness of the beer. So you can keep it still relatively dry while retaining those roasty flavors. But you don't want to go so dry that it just loses the mouthfeel. And it just becomes this kind of like bone dry, like because the malts, the roasted malts are going to have a little bit of bitter, notes to them already.
Right.
So it's tricky to find that balance. And I think it's probably particular per recipe, for the gravity you're trying to hit, the hops that you're using, that you use. But one that I come back to often that's a little bit easier to find. I've had some one-offs right here and there that are like fantastic, but one that you might be able to find off the top of my head is Stone Sublimely Self-Righteous Black IPA. I do think that's one that is a pretty good go-to that does strike this balance. And that's just because I think Stone has such a long history of making IPAs now. They make so many IPAs, they really understand what makes an IPA tick.
Right.
And I think with this one, they've retained that while still trying to make the stouty, roasty part of it like keep up
shine
with it. But not dominate.
Awesome. I
now the real tricky one is finding you should. The real tricky one is finding a good black barley wine, which those are awesome.
I had that.
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't think I had a black barley wine. Oh, interesting. Oh. So Stone's in SoCal?
Yeah, they're in San Diego or outside San Diego.
So this might be one of those things where I hit my brother-in-law and sister who are in Berkeley.
I think they actually opened up a brewery in the UK, or they're in the process of it. Like one of the things about Stone is that they do not ship, or rather, their entire fleet is refrigerated. So their beer is refrigerated from bottling to point point to point.
Jeez.
Right? So the trucks, everything. So for that reason, they don't for example, ship overseas because they would have to refrigerate it overseas to meet their quality. So for that reason, they wanted to move more into the European market. And I read at one point that they were opening another brewery in the UK in order to just brew it over there and ship it completely.
Oh yeah, there's a Stone Brewing UK.
Or is it UK? Okay.
Looks like that's, I don't know, but they've got an Instagram and a Twitter, Stone Brewing UK. I will look further into it, but in the interest of staying on topic, I will seamlessly segue to Curtis, who has been here the whole time, waiting patiently to tell us about his beer.
Yeah, you guys have been taking a long time. Oof. But, yeah, I would say Black IPA, that energy maybe describes our game pretty well. We're trying to do these two things at once. But I have something completely different. I have something, it's very traditional, but I actually haven't had this before. So I've had Chimay blue and red. I've always avoided the Chimay white because I felt like, I don't know why. It just didn't seem to attract me. But I saw it today and I decided, you know what, maybe today is finally the chance where I can try it out and compare it to some other ones to see how I feel about it. I don't know. Have you guys had? It's pretty popular. Yeah.
A long time ago.
I was gonna say I haven't had a Chimay in donkey's years, which is how long it used to take for them to ship it around via donkey. That's a Trappist joke. While you pour that, I'm going to tell you about my beer, which is Siren's Cacao and Hazelnut Broken Dream. It's a twisted breakfast stout, 5.8%. An indulgence of chocolate and specialty malts, Broken Dream is smooth, unctuous, and Moorish. It's brewed with milk sugar for balance and mouthfeel, along with carefully selected espresso. As a special one-off, we've taken it a step further, spinning the beer on cacao nuts and hazelnut for a delicious praline twist. Yeah. So Siren's a solid brewery here, here in the UK, and yeah, I one thing I do like about Siren is, I mean, going back on our chat, is they know how to stout. Which for an all-rounder brewery, sometimes that's, especially given the tastes of the public, being pale ale IPA focused, it's not uncommon to have all like breweries who do everything. Their stouts are just sort of all right. Siren's not that. Siren knows how to. Their nitro stout that they came out with a few months back, although it's probably 6, but was excellent. When they come out with a new stout, I'm always like, yes, this will be on my shopping list. And so I'm really excited about the cacao and hazelnut spin on the Broken Dream.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I would be curious to hear how it turns out. I feel like that is one of those things that is very ambitious. Like there's so many things going on there. Hazelnut can absolutely overpower and ruin a beer.
Absolutely.
And then having the milk sugar in there, there's the danger that it's not just silky and a nice full mouthful, but rather
sweet
and kind of slick, right? So it sounds like one of those things that, like, if pulled off well, would be excellent, but it could be awful.
Yeah. I mean, so Siren definitely not a stranger to lactose in their stouts, but you're right. Like the hazelnut is, I think, the X factor that I'm like, oh, I'm on the same page as you. Is like it could go either way, because I know they can do lactose stouts with lactose in them. I know they can do cacao. I'm sure they could figure like it together, but also just the number of extra ingredients to balance. Like even if you're good at all three, doesn't mean you know how to do them all at once. But before we find out whether it lives up to its hype, tell us about that Chimay.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, it's got a lovely reddish. Is that sort of reddy orange?
I would say amber. It might be on my computer.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's impossible. Like everything in my room looks like super yellow. So everyone's like, "Oh, it's straw colored." I'm like, "No, it's just my."
Yeah,
camera."
I would say it's more amber color.
Okay.
It's very attractive. It had a nice head, but not over the top.
Otherwise, it would have spilled.
Long-lasting lacing. Yeah, I would say that. I don't know why I avoided this beer for so long. It's obviously very good. I mean, like a kind of, I don't recall exactly if people turn or consider this like a Belgian strong ale versus like a Belgian golden ale, but it's in that kind of like zone of things. And I would say that this is like a kind of archetypical, like the kind of epitome of that in a sense. Just tasting it for the first time, I almost feel like all the other beers that I was tasting in that kind of genre were kind of trying to hit this.
Oh wow! So, what's the ABV again?
It is 8%.
Okay, yeah. So
but once again, I think it's fuller. Some strangely, I feel like it is fuller bodied than the Rockford. Definitely drier. And it's got that nice Belgian yeasty flavors. Whoop, sorry. Also, definitely lively, but not as quite as effervescent. Definitely lemongrass, like lemongrass coming through loud and clear, and I like it a lot. I like that flavor, and I guess what I like about this in a strange way is that it's not complicating it. I feel like, especially these days, we're in the almost decadent postmodern period of beers.
That's such a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and this is like a very modernist. Like this is doing its thing very well. Like it's very clearly figured out. Like they know what they're doing, and they're doing that exactly. So it's great.
That is the benefit of Belgian and Trappist beers, right? It's just like not only are they not aspiring to be complicated, but also they've been doing it a long time, so they definitely are doing it well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to dig around to find Chimay because the thing is I don't know. This is the weird thing about like not the big names in Trappist beers is like bottle shops will carry Roquefort, for example, like craft bottle shops, but you don't often get other because there's only so much Trappist shelf space. You know what I mean? It's actually I don't remember last time I saw a Chimay in my usual haunts, but I'll have to dig around because you've reminded me they exist. Not in a bad way, just like there's only so much beer you can see in the world, and but I've had them before and I've always been impressed, and it's been a while. So
Yeah, Chimay Blue in particular was kind of my jam for
mm,
a while. I really love that beer. But I have to say, like, I think this is very, very, very good. I mean,
mm.
yeah, it tastes classic just tasting it for the first time. I'll feel like that.
Yeah, it's a would quintessential sort of Trappist beer.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
vibe I was getting from your description. Meanwhile, I've got this lovely. Immediately can smell the lactose on the nose. You get this nice sweet, but not sickly, just a nice sweet hit, and you get some roasted. You get the cacao coming off of the roasted malts, so it's again, yeah, it almost a very light, like note of like a high grade hot chocolate. Like just a light note, so it's not the main bit, but just like oh yes, there's like that cacao is there, and it's really cacao, and there's some there's that milky sweetness, and then underneath is this the main nose it's actually quite light in nose, but the main nose is still this like maltiness, but yeah, you get this hint of really rich milk and chocolate. Um, it poured with maybe a third of a finger of head, and it's still there. Um, mm. So it's what would I say? 5 point something, 5.8%. It's reasonably carbonated. Um, but you can tell just like close to 6% is coming through in the mouthfeel. It's just got a little more thickness than the last beer I had, which is good because it's actually that any worries about that lactose giving it just too much thickness, too much sweetness, is not it's not there. Like it's that lactose is there. It's giving. I think they called it milk sugar or something in the flavor text, and I think that's a good way of distinguishing it because this does not taste like a beer that's had lactose put in it. It's got just enough that it's like doing something to the taste, but it's not thickening it. It's not a creamy tasting stout. Um, Definitely roasted characters. Um, there is that the lactose is giving a lovely sweetness right from the start. It's just as the initial taste is this surge of more cacao, and then as the cacao fades, this it's held like it's basically the taste curve is kind of being held together by this constant light sweetness, and then you're getting the roasted notes after the cacao is faded. And actually, what I'm really liking about this is I have to look for the hazelnut, which I think is a good thing because, as Chad mentioned, hazelnut is a thing best enjoyed in small doses, I think, and so it's doing something in the taste, but it's not like if they didn't have it on there, I think the average person wouldn't notice. It's not like I'm drinking Nutella, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have to admit, my first one of our first experiences with craft ale was some cheap, local Oklahoma, where we're originally from, Oklahoma.
Local
There
home.
was some local Oklahoma brewery that did a hazelnut
Mm.
ale, and we must. I don't want to say how old we are, but I'll just say we were younger, and it really put me off at first. I thought that that's what craft ale
Right.
was that kind of a flavor, and it was just overbearing. Tasted like I don't know, it was just overbearing.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
I think we
that was
were
an
kind of
awful beer.
ended up not coming back to craft ale for a little while because we were so put off by that experience. And it turned out, no, that was just one bad
And
ale from a bad brewery.
Mm. Yeah, so this is thankfully the opposite, where I'm noticing the hazelnut on the tip of my tongue, sort of near the end of the finish. Although the finish is again like the last beer I had with you guys, quite long, and it's mostly the roasted notes. And again, that the lactose is just offset, just there enough to offset that roastedness. But as the finish as progresses, the lactose dips away, and that's like the moment was when the milky sweetness is going away. That's the moment I'm noticing, yes, the hazelnut is there. It's been there the whole time, but it's just so much in the back seat. And it's like until other things have receded, and they're like, oh right, this, like I jokingly mentioned Nutella, but like, oh yeah, there is this Nutella like light note, like I'm talking 20 seconds into the finish, right? And that's just because the the milky sweetness is almost all gone, but I've got this lovely backbone of just roasted, slightly dry finish, and then it's like and in there is hazelnut. This is a really good beer, and I think, especially after Chad, you mentioned like hazelnuts. I didn't actually think when I bought this how tenuous a hazelnut beer could be, and this is doing it exactly how you want. Like it's there.
That's awesome.
It's they're doing things, but it's not. You know, it's like the in The Sound of Music, the Baroness. Hazelnut should be, you know, tasted not felt or felt not tasted. That's I'm butcher the paraphrase,
Right.
but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
it's having the impact, but unless I look for it, I wouldn't have noticed. And it's clearly, it's not just like we put some hazelnut, but no, don't worry, it's not there. Like it's clearly there the whole time. It's just at the right stage in relative to the other things. Yeah. So
Yeah, that reminds me of the Winston Churchill quote that I believe it's Churchill, that the best martini is a glass of gin while looking at a bottle of vermouth.
that is how I mean, it's slightly stronger than how I make martinis, but in the lockdowns we did so I live with 5 other people, and we did a pub crawl where we did up our rooms as different bars and made signature cocktails so that we could have a night out. This is like
That's fun.
heart of 2020, right? And I made a lounge and I made martinis, and I knocked everyone flat on their asses because I forgot that not everyone's used to my martini, which is just a glass of frozen gin and a few splashes of vermouth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as it should be.
Yeah. All right, so that's our beers. I'm gonna really, so this I suspect I'll nurse just because that finish is really nice and long, and there's no reason to rush through it. But we last time we spoke, we talked a lot about the mechanics, but we didn't really talk as much about the narrative and the aesthetics. And Curtis, you sort of teased the notion of the aesthetics on the different levels being different because you chose not to go sort of more connected world. But I've been super curious on on just like the non-mechanic gameplay design stuff, the like choices, the narrative, the music, and that stuff. Because obviously, I know you guys put a lot of thought into these parts, and I get that you might not want to talk too much about the narrative because the narrative needs to be played. But I thought maybe you could just speak a little more about those choices. For example, like let's start with just level aesthetics. Like what so you had the idea that if everything was stitched together, you were stuck in the aesthetics. But then when you decoupled that, where did that put you guys? And like artistically, what did you like about that freedom / where how much should we be prepared as players to be like nothing's the same?
I would say,
I have some.
one thing that I'm proud of is that we did have a fair amount of variety within a very clear, I think, very, if I can say so, very strong aesthetic sense. One of the things that I'm proud of is that we did, in fact, I think, find, I would be willing to say, absolutely the correct aesthetic that went with this. And it wasn't automatic. I think a good aesthetic, when people view it, will feel like it was obvious and easy. And in fact, it was everything but. It was so hard to arrive at the aesthetic sensibilities of the game. We had no inclination that it would turn out like this at all. When we first started the game, we had no idea what it would become. And so it was absolutely a journey to get there. And I think the thing that brought it along the whole way was like, yeah, a more conceptual idea of recursion and strange loops. And that underpins essentially every aspect of it. And it even ended up underpinning the aesthetics. And now, on this side of it, that seems obvious. But the other side at the beginning, it was not so. It was not obvious at all. So we tried all sorts of things. As far as like aesthetic sensibilities, we tried like hi-fi, we tried lo-fi. We're like small indie guys. We're just like 1.5 dudes. We ended up getting a publisher, but we had no idea we were going to get a publisher. But when we first started,
Right.
So we were trying to do things that like we could realistically do on our own. Being people that I don't have a formal artistic training. I have a musical training and some programming chops. But it ended up that three-dimensional fractals just ended up being exactly what we needed and what the game needed and what we ended up being pretty good at. Because like one of the things that we're good at being musicians who have programming chops is we had made a fair amount of music procedurally, and we were pretty familiar with procedural techniques. And it turned out that a procedural visual technique was something that we could do.
Interesting.
And so it's not like it came naturally. It's more like experimenting with lots of stuff. At one point, I remember it's hilarious to think back on. Actually, I remember blasting Skinny Puppy and thinking we were going to do something with like a very kind of gnarly industrial vibe that was much messier. And it's hilarious now because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I love Skinny Puppy, but it made no sense.
I mean, who doesn't?
Yeah.
Also, I think that dates us all, by the way.
Absolutely. So, sure. Yeah, ended up just brushing up on, in particular, the family of techniques that I think drove everything, visually at least, but ended up bleeding into everything else, was something called signed distance fields, which is just a kind of subset of ray marching and ray tracing. So it's this idea with signed distance fields in particular. I'll start with ray marching in particular. Normally what you're saying is we're going to like a ray tracing. We'll just say we've got some stuff in the world, right? We're going to start at the camera. We're at a position. And to figure out what to show on the screen, we're going to move forward a fixed amount. And then whenever we hit something, we'll look up what's the color of the thing we hit, what direction is it facing, and that's going to tell us how to display it on the screen.
Right.
That's the essential nature of ray tracing.
Yeah.
So signed distance fields is a kind of subset of that, and it's a different variation on it. And really what it's saying is that we're going to do the same general idea. We're going to move forward until we hit something. But instead of doing it at this fixed step amount, instead we're going to say, how far away, every step of the way, how far away is the closest surface? And it could be in any direction. It could be behind you, to the right, to the left. And it will give you a value saying positive or negative. If it's positive, that means you're outside of a surface. If it's negative, that means you're inside of a surface. So you need to backtrack. So what you end up doing is you have a framework for analytical geometry. So you can actually describe things mathematically, shapes. And it ends up being one of the most fun ways to do that is fractals. And
right.
In particular, three-dimensional Mandelbulbs and three-dimensional Mandel boxes, which is actually the thing that we ended up using the most. So once we started hacking with that, it was just like hilariously, obviously, clearly the way thing to be doing.
The way your game needed to be.
Right, because what came first was the concept and then the mechanic. And it was all gray boxes. The first time I showed it to Chad, it was just a platform with a chair with this weird squid-looking guy, who was the first iteration of Elric, the character you meet in the demo. And even at that stage, I think it kind of had this energy to it, which is why we went with the idea.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that last time we like the first time you guys sat with us. I think I remember you talking about that iteration where that really sparked the vibe of where the game was gonna be. Was Chair Dude.
Yeah, because I think for us, I mean, I'm sure it's different for everybody. For us, I think, strangely enough, I think emotions drive the direction of our design concepts, and so is that feeling of that traveling forward, yet somehow not getting anywhere.
You
Somehow,
definitely have both done PhDs.
yes, the concept of the eternal return, right?
Yeah.
Like that, just I love that feeling, and that's what came first,
Right.
is the feeling, and then how you work with it is what came next. And it just developed, it flowered out. So the visuals dropped out from that, the music dropped out from that. The story was actually one of the last things. The narrative aspect was one of the last things to drop out.
So this was the thing I was curious about, because I remember when we first spoke, there was obviously less knowledge around the narrative, but like last episode we talked a bunch about how your game design was linear because the narrative is so important. And obviously we don't want to talk about details of the narrative because narrative needs to be... Oh wow, my brain reached for a word and got endured, and that's clearly not the word you guys want me to use.
I would accept it.
I think that would be apt.
Experienced is the word I was looking for. Shows you where my mental state's been lately. Yeah, so I'm curious. So it obviously means a lot. But the original premise, like you guys didn't come up with a story and then wrap a game around it, right? So I'm really curious about, given like you developed a game that is very much the intertwining of gameplay and narrative, how that evolved sort of over top of you had some clarity on gameplay from the get-go and, maybe vibes and aesthetic, but how the narrative became such a pillar of the game as well in that development process.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it comes back to that thing that Curtis mentioned about us being more emotional, intuitive, I would say, about mechanical things like this. So whenever we were starting to work on our, this idea that we're going to make a game, we really had no idea what it was going to be. We tried all these different ideas. Most of them didn't go anywhere or were very interesting. This one, there was something that, we both looked at and we just knew that there was something here, and it was about figuring out how to draw it out. And part of the thing that was there was this emotional kind of intuition that there's a feeling that comes along with this strange awe of this kind of infinity. And I would say that emotion, I would say, was the kernel for a narrative that grew out of it. But really, it's this kind of emotion that we're trying to capture. And also, I would say, some conceptual elements that came along with it. And as you play the game, these threads, the closer you look, are kind of actually just throughout the entire thing. And I would say that actually they kind of became this like symbiosis where, like, yes, we came up with the idea of the nesting first before the narrative, but at a certain point, whenever we really focused on the narrative and we thought about the story that we really wanted to tell and how we wanted to tell it, it flipped around where suddenly we were actually changing the level flow. We were changing how the levels were built, the mechanics that were built. We actually completely rebuilt 2 levels entirely, all the puzzles and everything from scratch at one point, as well as added some glue content, I would say, throughout. And it really became this symbiosis where they like fed into each other. Where like, yes, this kind of initial emotional and conceptual thrust kind of was born, and then out of that came a narrative. But in defining the narrative, we realized that we had to make the world like reflect it. And part of that, we, a little while ago, we talked about how there's this progression throughout levels of aesthetic changes as well as mechanic changes. One of the important things about that is that it allowed us to change it in order to correctly, I think, communicate the kind of evolving tonality throughout the game. So, there's this evolution, not in chronology of real time, but I would say there's kind of an evolution in your understanding of chronology of events, and this kind of, almost fractal-like distillation of things that you find out about the character and their experiences. And that itself has a kind of arc, and that's the thing that we wanted to communicate totally throughout the game.
Oh, you've really piqued me on that, because obviously the demo only goes so far, so the setup of the demo in a sort of gives you a notion of the character has certain things that happen. You have some understanding of relationships, and then you get thrust into this very weird world with different sorts of stakes communicated by the entities you meet in the first couple puzzle levels. So I am super intrigued that I'm not surprised that it loops back and goes back to the early stuff, but that that tantalizes, giving more meat to what the narrative might be. So yeah, that's also, I mean, it really does sound like the advantage of you guys being a couple of guys making a game that you want to make, because that sounds like, to me, the ideal way of developing a creative project, which is letting it feel itself out. Because if you were just making a puzzle game, you would figure out how to make those compasses work, because you have to publish it. So I guess I'm now more intrigued. I guess if anything, I'm surprised that there's only so much you can do in a 20-minute demo, but I guess I'm surprised that the demo sort of is quite puzzle heavy versus narrative light. But I guess that's how you sell a game, because it's a game. But this leads me to the question of, given that they're intertwined this way, etc. How did you? I've never been able to ask them this, but how did you figure out where your demo, like, which chunk is demo?
Yeah, I mean, there's no right answer, I think, is the real answer. But there's whatever is appropriate for the game. Our game, thankfully, was just really, it was very obvious and very amenable to a demo, because there's this narrative linear aspect to it. So
yeah, and you have distinct levels.
Exactly, we have distinct levels. It's got narrative and it's linear. It's very simple to just decide, okay, where do we cut it off?
Yeah.
There's other games where it's much harder. Like if you've got a strategy game, what is the demo is a much harder thing. And in fact, having talks with the publisher, they, Iceberg Interactive, they, I think, they're a little bit more cautious about demos, because they deal with a lot of games of more different types, and a lot of games have a very hard time being put into demo form. And even, for instance, having a demo that can be updated can be a very big challenge for a game that was not made to be demoable.
Right.
But thankfully, our game was always very easy about that. I've always had the demo was constantly updating with the game. It was never an issue. So it was very.
Oh, so you scoped the demo reasonably early on?
I mean, it's very. Yeah, we knew exactly the form of the entire game. I don't know exactly how far back, but the structure, we're kind of, if you were to be mean to us, you'd say we were formalists or structuralists, and if we were in the Soviet Union, we'd be, shot. So we knew the structure of the thing
right
pretty early on, including where you would cut it off for a demo. And then at that point, it was just about maintaining it and making sure that it functioned on its.
Oh, that's super interesting. I mean, I guess it makes sense. I mean, I've never made a game. I think I wouldn't have even thought about the demo cutoff point until someone's like, so you get to do a demo? It's like, oh, probably. Oh, shit. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think for this game, we'll see with our next game, we may struggle a lot more. But with this one, there's basically a few things that you're trying to communicate with the demo. One is an understanding of the basic premise.
Yeah.
Another is an understanding of the basic narrative, especially important for this game. Another is some familiarity with the mechanics. You want to set them up to be interested, but not give them so much that they already become bored.
Yeah.
You want to leave them off wanting more, ideally. So I think for us, having the way just the structure of the game is, it really was clear that like, okay, there's like this part where you're opening up and it's more narrative, and then there's the part that's more puzzle heavy. This demonstrates the two main facets of the game. So, and we need to show both of those, because if you don't get enough of either one, people will buy the game under the wrong premise.
Yeah,
we really want to make sure that people buy the game knowing the experience that they're going to have. So we want to make sure that both parts were well represented. And then it was just about finding the right beat. And the part at the end of the demo, I think from like a narrative point of view, is kind of setting you up. Like, here's kind of a little bit of a lore dump, and it's kind of setting you up for, I would say, your kind of long term kind of like goal in the in game fiction. Was a good kind of ending point to say like, okay, now you know what you're supposed to be going to do. Please,
yeah.
Kind of, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, super interesting. One thing that I've been curious about is like, obviously it's a puzzle game, etc. But like, how long is the average playthrough of this game?
Good question. Our idea of how long it is has changed several times. And in fact, Chad and I had a wager to see who would be right and who would be wrong, because I thought it would be shorter. Chad thought it would be longer. I think it's ended up somewhere in between. So if you're really
that is not how I would color how that
like,
debate
man,
ended.
I think in 4 dimensions. You could, in theory, get through the game in 4 hours, and I've seen people do that.
I was gonna say, like, the speedrun approach, which is not something you guys probably necessarily want, because that's the skip the cutscenes part.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if you were to literally just, like, we've done playthroughs. By the way, this is a challenging thing about this kind of a game, as opposed to like a game that is more combinatorial. Like if you're playing a strategy game, you can get a real play test of it in maybe like 30 minutes. And it's like,
right.
Yeah, we're going to test the beginning, middle, and ending of a match. That's like a good
stress
test. This is hard because there's so much content in it. It's like, 3 hours. If you know all the solutions and you skip all the cutscenes, it's still a good 3-hour dedication of your life to just get through the thing. So it was, challenging to test it from that point of view. But yeah, I'd say that was the lower bound. Maybe if you could do a straight up speed run, or you were trying to cut corners and break the game, you could maybe get it down to 2.5. But I think realistically, 4 is the lower bound, but 9 is the upper bound. It's
okay, so
range.
That is a wide range.
I would say 5.5 is maybe the average from Steam reviews.
Right.
Or maybe 6. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, 5.5, 6 is about the average
of data.
Yeah.
So now you've piqued my interest on how testing went. Because I mean, some people don't do enough testing, but also it's I mean, for our listeners, I think it's a fairly opaque part of the development process, because it's not often talked about. But with a puzzle game that's also in a very unique environmental, mechanically environmental world, that must be such a challenge to get testers to. Like you want like idiots like me who sequence break and then find weird physics holes and fall through the universe, presumably, to like put it through its paces.
Yeah, I mean, so we thankfully we had a kind of small team, if you could call it that, really just friends and family that put it through its paces as it was developing in its very young, immature stage, right? And so that was good because these people were always on tap, especially, look, we're not quite Femto. I would say we're Nano. We're a Nano developer.
Yeah.
It's just Chad and me. We ended up getting, a couple of people to help with character art, but it's basically just Chad and me. So that was good. These people, they just, they would do like your initial, just like gut check.
Yeah.
Does this feel good? Does this work? Did I obviously break it? And you would be surprised how much just having somebody else who's never seen your game, they don't understand how it works, they don't know anything about your stupid concepts.
Right.
They don't know. We had this feeling. They don't know anything about that. Right?
Yeah.
They just play this for the first time. you'd be surprised how much stuff you catch just from that alone. So just having that regular check-in of these people coming in every step of the way and giving us feedback was invaluable. But at a certain point, it becomes more mature, and like that doesn't cut it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the advantage we got, I don't think we would have had this if we didn't get a publisher. We were lucky enough to team up with Iceberg, and they actually had professionals.
Oh, I was gonna say, so Iceberg brought QA.
Yes, they brought in an actual QA team. These people were professionals. They made me feel unprofessional. I'll put it like that. This was like, it's like, calling up Marcellus Wallace and we're sitting in the Wolf. These people came in and they scientifically knew how to break your shit. Right? It was like, you thought your game was stable? We're here to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So they scientifically break your shit and then they document it very well. And so what you end up getting is a long list of all of the bugs in your game.
Yeah.
Right? And so it was my job as they were going through it to try to smash the bugs as they found them. But they could find them a lot faster than I could.
Yeah, because you're not several people.
Yeah. So, but we ended up getting it to where, there was a collection of what they put them in priorities.
Yeah.
So we had like high, medium, low, and very low. I ended up getting smashed all of the high, and so very high, and medium ended up all getting
nice.
fixed. So there ended up being a collection of bugs that I couldn't quite get to. I know sometimes they're like the kind of thing that maybe you go off really the beaten path and you really do this thing that most people wouldn't do.
Yeah. I mean, but again, we spoke about this last episode, but the notion of it's okay if it is good enough, right? Like you can't just try and fix all the bugs because in something as complicated as a game and its engine, there will be bugs made out of quick killing bugs, but also sunk costs. It's not worth. It's fine. You know what? And if it's not like a game-breaking, destroy your save, crash everything bug, fuck it. Who cares? Bethesda doesn't. Why should you?
My philosophy was always just you should always be able to get through the game, period. There should never be an excuse where the game breaks. And so I could tell you absolutely that will never happen.
You'll you said that's the very high, right? High.
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, just not beyond that, to speak infrastructurally, a lot of bugs and a lot of efficiency concerns with programming, I think, can be solved infrastructurally, which is to say that you should by the design of your code, make it impossible for certain things to occur, or make it so such things are absolutely guaranteed. And so the design of the game, and the way that it saves state, makes it such that even if you can get soft locks, and there are, I know of them, some soft locks that are in the game, you can always quit the game, restart, and it will always fix it. You'll never get there's no hard locks in the game. It's impossible by design, by the infrastructure of the game itself. You cannot get hard locked. So that was one of the best decisions I ended up making because, sometimes you see a person, and I get it, nobody likes to hit a bug, but it's always much better where you hit a bug, it's kind of annoying, you quit, you come back, and then it's fixed.
Yeah.
That's way better. I'm much happier that I got to fix, that I get to finish the game.
Yeah. Could you talk to Discord and OBS? Because currently, I don't think their shit's working properly on my computer.
I mean, one thing I'll say, for the solution that we have here, and just kind of broadly speaking, it's really particular to the game and the way the game works. So the reason is because there's some deterministic qualities to what is done in the game and how you make progression. There are other kinds of contexts and domains where you don't have the luxury to have an entry point or such determinism to be able to, have recovery elements that are so predictable. And certainly things that are network related, I think, are some of the most complicated things that you could try to get to work consistently. So I don't envy the people that work on Discord or OBS. I'm sure it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that regardless of how complex the domain is, there are decisions that you can make early on about, especially how you handle things like state, that can make things easier or harder on yourself later. Right. And if you don't put in the thought to do this, almost assuredly you're going to land on the thing that's harder, right? You need to put some thought into it.
I would take it further. I would say that as I've grown as a programmer, I have realized that state is absolutely the king. That is everything, all your problems and all your solutions relate to state. So if you can think in terms of the state of your program, whatever it is, be it a game or otherwise, and how you've got inputs, you've got transformations, and that transformations will take the state from one thing, transform it into another thing, and then you have outputs. The closer you can get to thinking about that, and then making your program think like that, the better it will be, and the closer it will match to the behavior you want it to exhibit. Right? Where people, I think, get mixed up is where people start thinking in terms of abstractions that are not inherent to the actual thing that's occurring on the computer. That's where bugs occur, because especially gnarly bugs that infrastructurally cannot be fixed or can totally fuck up a user's experience, is because they don't reflect the reality of the program. Right? The reality of the program is that there are bits of data stored in RAM on a computer. There's instructions that a computer will go through to transform them into a different set of bits. And your goal is to make the output of the monitor and the speakers give the correct output. That is your job.
So as a logician, I love hearing this, because what you're saying is, don't forget, you're just working with a Turing machine.
Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely. So that's one of the biggest, if I could impart anything upon, if anyone's like, I want to make games, and as a programmer, right? That's one of the biggest things I would say is, make sure you understand that computers are a machine. They are a Turing machine. Von Neumann, technically, if we're going to get more technical, the von Neumann architecture machine, you need to understand what that means, how it behaves, and how to actually operate it. It would be like you're operating some machine at a factory, but you don't know what all the levers do. I feel like sometimes, unfortunately, there are programmers that get in this place where they don't know what all the levers do on the machine, but they're pulling them.
Well,
so
I think it's like one layer of abstraction away, which is they know that in certain situations, pulling this lever will have the outcome they're desiring, but they don't really understand why that's the situation. The situation and the lever are mapped to each other, which means similar situations will appear to them as that situation, and that's where the problem arises.
Yes, exactly, because it's a problem of conception and of abstraction. And in fact, I would say abstraction is one of the things. Don't get me wrong, I think abstraction can be very useful, but sweeping away details at times can be extraordinarily costly, right?
This is literally what my dissertation was about.
Yeah, to get on my grandstanding box over here for a moment, there's a very famous quote from a computer scientist named Donald Knuth, which is that premature optimization is the root of all evil. I think that this is a horribly misquoted excerpt from him, or at least misunderstood. Donald Knuth knew how to write very efficient code. He's the kind of guy that would write his own try implementation for string handling in just some random console program. But I think that the thing that he was really getting at is that you should understand the problem that you're solving fundamentally first. Personally, the saying that I like to throw around is kind of a counter to that, which I think, at least from my kind of ethos, I think makes more sense, which is premature abstraction is the root of all evil. I think if you're rushing too far into inventing narratives for yourself or what you're doing or what this code means on some fictional level, you're giving yourself more problems. Your code's going to be less performant, harder to maintain, harder to extend. I think starting simple, understanding the problem, and if you don't have enough information to make a great solution early on, make a deletable solution. Make a solution that you're not afraid of just removing and replacing with something equally simple but more appropriate. And that, just in general, you're going to get further faster.
And especially for like, if you're an indie developer, right? This is the thing about being an indie developer in particular is you have to be a bit of a Renaissance person, right? You have to be able to command multiple domains. It's very hard to be, on one hand, I have this emotion, I have this conceptual idea, and I want people to feel something. At the same time, how do I make a program that mechanically induces them to feel that? Those are very hard things to balance. So I think that what Chad's saying about simplicity is absolutely true, because if things are simple, if you can delete them, whenever your idea about what this is develops and changes, which it absolutely will, and it has to, right? Your implementation of it has the agility to be able to change with it, and still be performant, stable,
right,
and exhibit the behavior you need it to. So it's a hard thing to balance.
I mean, I think that this is philosophy adult jumping in, which is like the work I'm currently doing is not in logic, it's in general formal stuff, because the parallels in AI and implementation of just processes that are not handled by humans is essentially that same problem of abstraction without a tether to what's going on. So like, you look at AIs approving mortgages, and it's like, well, the black box has said that like African American people in the States aren't reliable, so we're just going to turn all of them down. It's the same. These are all the same symptoms of the same. I don't want to derail us too much, but it's very much the same problem, which is if you throw a program, which is just a blunt tool, at a problem without understanding what all the factors are, let alone which ones you can afford to abstract away, then you're obviously going to have a very poor output. And this is what you guys are saying, which is understand the problem and understand the costs of the abstraction or idealization of a specific approach. And you can't do the second part without spending enough time on the first part. And even then you might screw up the second part. And I think this is where a lot of modern problems lie. But anyway,
if I could derail us just slightly more. I'll throw out, Chad may be mad at me. I apologize, Chad, but I'll throw out a big soapbox thing real quick, which is just to say that the machine learning kind of, I think, trend that is happening, I think there's some interesting stuff about it. You know, to be fair, we ourselves do make use of some of it in the game, although we're mostly not. Mostly it's all procedural techniques where we are analytically generating either music or geometry or whatever. And it's something that we've commanded, right? But we do use specifically some machine learning techniques on the visuals that happen in the memories.
Right.
But my issue with that stuff in particular is that, and I think it goes larger than just creative arts, but it definitely applies to creative arts, which is that these algorithms that are trained on data sets don't function without the data sets, right? So you have these algorithms which can oftentimes, you know, in the right hands, I think generate some really interesting, amazing visuals. But you have to understand that that was derived from human creativity. These things would not generate anything if they had not analyzed both the world and people. So it's a little bit strange to me that people take out of that means that human creativity in the world can now be devalued, when in fact they rely on the value of human creativity and its perception of the world. So it's a little sad to me that we're getting into this place, I think, where maybe human creativity will both be plundered and devalued. I hope we don't get there. I hope
in this economy.
Yeah, I know we could go. We could go even further, but I'll leave it at that. I hope that we understand that human creativity is worthwhile. We don't just plunder it.
That's more than fair. I mean, you were called out before this soapbox. So do you have anything you wanted to add to that, Chad?
I mean, I agree with everything that you said. I think what I would add to it is machine learning techniques are, I would say, part of a long history and tradition of using tools and technologies in creative endeavors. And it's obviously like a very obvious thing to say that this is a human history long endeavor. Ever since we've been singing or whatever, along the way or not there long after has come technology to, assist us. To give a pretty interesting kind of example of how this can be just more fundamental is if you look at the music of J.S. Bach. One of his greatest works, and kind of, I would say, kind of heralding a whole era, is the Well-Tempered Clavier. And this is a work of amazing fugues and all these different kinds of pieces, with the fundamental premise being that it's being played on an instrument using well-tempered tuning. What is that? Now, if you're not familiar with music, what it is that normally back then, traditionally, they didn't have pianos, they had like clavichords and things like this, harpsichords. A keyboard would be designed to work in a particular tuning, and it would mean that certain voicings of certain harmonies would be correct, or at least perfectly tuned. And as you get further away from those in the harmonic series, they become more and more slightly imprecise. The well-tempered kind of clavier, and this idea of equal temperament, basically made it to where we fixed the semitones in the octave, which effectively makes all of the harmonies slightly out of tune, but enough that it's acceptable. But what it meant is that if you were wanting to write music that was more widely modulating, that had more complex harmonies, that traveled further away from the tonic, you could do so and retain the tonality and the tuning as you did so. For J.S. Bach, that's amazing because he wanted to write all this really intricate, nuanced music that would iterate on this almost kind of like monomolistic, like maniacal, like sensibility of iteration on just little like 3-note melodies. And so it allowed him to write a kind of music that he wasn't really able to perform before. Now, I'm saying all this because this is still true of any newer technology, right? So every time we have the introduction of computers, the introduction of machine learning, whatever, you name it, it's another tool. It gives us new ways to work in a creative endeavor that will enable us to express ourselves somewhat differently. However, all that said, I will say that as we get further and further into these kinds of techniques and tooling that I would say have a sense of almost automation to them, there's like a more complex expression for the input. One thing to keep in mind is that you need to be considerate of the amount of input to the output that you get. If you're using a system, it doesn't matter if it's machine learning or not, and the amount of input that you prompt it with is minimal, you're going to get a great homogenization of the output, right? Mm-hmm. And that means that not necessarily that it's bad, but rather that it's going to be more similar to anything else that anybody else would make with it. So whenever you see these systems going around online, it's like, oh, you type a sentence and it draws a picture, right? You see one of them, you think it's kind of clever. You see 5 of them, you're like, oh, I get it. You see 20, you're bored. Mm-hmm. That is true. But that doesn't mean that machine learning is bad or machine learning can't make anything that's like truly interesting. It just means that probably if you're wanting to do something like that, you're going to need to use an infrastructure or a system where you're going to give yourself more input to work with. It's probably not going to be as easy to work with as the thing you had before. And it's going to look more like a normal artistic endeavor where you're sitting there like riffing on things and trying ideas and experimenting. So I don't know. I just wanted to say all that because I think that it's a little bit easy to like hit the machine learning, field as like, just kind of like
burn it down. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah. I really appreciate you saying that because I think one of the things, especially from the public perspective, is machine learning is just this magic button. Like we're at the stage of not understanding machine learning as like computers were in like maybe the 70s or 80s even, like where people knew they were powerful and could do things to the point where they could do anything, and I don't know what their limitation is, and I don't know how that would be bound. And so like one of the things that like one of the few things I do in ethics, for example, is I talk about the actual true cost of AI and machine learning, because like GPT-3, it takes a hell of a lot of cycles to calculate a data set, and it's all bespoke, basically. So it sounds like you can do everything, but actually you need a very curated, specific, large enough data set for it to have good output, and then it needs a lot of computer cycles to crunch through that. That has a carbon footprint that is not mentioned in any ethics of AI. Ethics of AI is so concerned with weird like Terminator shit, and it should just be like the same things that we're pissed off at crypto about, right? It's just like, what are we doing to the planet with a carbon footprint? And as you're pointing out, like there is no way around it. If you want something like GPT-3 to have really good syntax and semantics and seamlessness, you need to burn a lot of the Amazon. Like, and it's because you need to have a good, well curated data set, and that's fine. You just have to recognize that if you don't do that human artistry at the front end, you get garbage at the back end.
Yeah, I would add to that. Absolutely, the impact on the climate and the earth and all this is incredibly important. But even more so, I wouldn't say more so, but equally so, is that it reinforces traditional power structures in a way that I don't like. So who has this data? Can you, as a random person that grew up, pick a smaller Lithuania, whatever. Do you have this data set? No. Google, some research institute, Amazon, they have that data, right? You cannot just do the same things that they do. You're a big corporation, or you're a government, or you're part of some institute. It really is, I would say, pulling back on a lot of the efforts of computers to democratize art. Things like the internet and computers, I think, give us a way to spread information seamlessly and to express ourselves. If you have yes, there's this fundamental, I would say, cost to getting into having a cell phone or a computer or something like that. But once you have one of them, because it's able to run any program that it can run on it, you can have effectively all the modular synths, right? You can do all these different things and express yourself in so many different ways at that one initial cost. But if the cost to entry is you need to have spied on millions of people or plundered the internet for decades of data, only a small number of people where a certain amount of power is hyper consolidated have access to that. And it's not really something that I'm really happy to see proliferate and get even more traction. I like this to see us go the other direction more.
Yeah.
My son to say exactly. I think we're probably all on the same page. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys, because I know music's really, your background, but also really important to you. We've touched gameplay and loops and narrative, and the first time we spoke, so much about this game was about loops, etc. And I'm just curious how the sonic landscape developed in the game, and if you guys could speak to how that developed, because frankly we don't hear a lot about that in when people talk about video games, but I suspect you had strong thoughts and ideas and fruitions.
Well, as I feel like a fraud almost, because before I said we were structuralists and formalists, and actually with this game I feel like in some ways we threw that off musically, because in the past we absolutely have this idea, I should say, of strange loops and recursion and feedback is not a new one for us. The reason we arrived at it, honestly, almost we were avoiding it because it was so obvious to us. We had played with it a lot in the past musically. We wrote one of our big pieces we made as undergrads was a piece called Strange Loop Number 1. By the way, there was never a Strange Loop Number 2.
Best kind of title.
Strange Loop Number 1. We absolutely went hard on the formalism of it. So it was a piece where it was kind of Bach in a sense, where it was an electronic piece, but it used prepared piano samples. And so we played, it started by playing a specific melody using the prepared piano samples. And then it would go through a set of variations, but the variations were a constant accelerando, such that it was always speeding up over time. And the thing is, when you learn music, what you find out, of course, is that rhythm is pitch. This is
Right.
one of the things you realize at some point is that A is just a eighth notes at 440 hertz, which is 440 times a second. It's just eighth notes, right? So what we did is we had the piece speed up faster and faster and faster, and of course there's a kind of exponential curve,
Mm-hmm.
such that by the end of it, the music has sped up so fast that it turns into a pitch,
Mm-hmm.
and then we take that pitch, and then slowly it starts to form into notes with attacks and decays, which then forms into the original melody that we had started the entire thing with, right? So it became a strange loop in and of itself. It would, in theory, keep going forever, where it would play the melody, it would go through some variations, it would speed up, it would turn into the melody again, and do the same thing again.
Right.
So, we had done a lot of stuff with that. We got a bit more into feedback, which is a kind of subset of that idea afterwards. But I think what happened with this is that we kind of went to a higher level. We really talked a lot of shit on abstractions before, but I do like abstractions. I think where I more happily love abstractions is in the kind of aesthetic emotional realm. I like abstractions a lot, and I think if you play this game without getting too much into spoilers of narrative or meaning, I think that abstractions are pretty important to the narrative aspect of the game and to the emotional aspect of the game. And so musically, we ended up going way harder on that side of things than we did on the formalistic side of things. So I think that feeling of being stuck, the feeling of some cyclicality, some sense of recursion was more important to us than the actuality of it.
Right.
I don't know, Chad, did you want to add on to that?
No, I definitely agree with all that. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't aesthetic decisions that I think draw upon both literal techniques and kind of moral, I would say, aesthetic kind of inclinations of this idea of infinity and recursion. There's a lot of techniques, for example, where you can sequence things in such a way where they technically don't repeat. Or you can have this kind of ostinato or rhythmic recursion and kind of reiteration that I would say draws upon it. But, I think in general with this game, with the music, we didn't want to make it just a rote technical exercise. We
Right.
really were more concerned about conveying the emotions and kind of, I would say the emotional state of the character or just like the story at different points. And I would say for that reason, it was a bit of a challenge for us in that we've written a lot of music where the music was the only thing really happening, or it was paired by something that was to the service of the music. So we've done lots of performances with, like kind of live generative systems or collaborative systems with these really large 3D visuals.
Mm-hmm.
But it's to the service of a musical performance, whereas this was a little bit more of there's a story we're trying to tell, there's a moment that's very important in telling that story that's happening right now. The music that needs to be here, it needs to say something specific, and it needs to say that in a way that supports the other aesthetic endeavors that we have. So can we correctly describe in this particular moment some kind of like cold, self-disheartened cynicism or whatever?
Right.
Just pick some really you can't even articulate it exactly, but doing that was a challenge for us. And I think we were more concerned in making sure that we were getting those things across than scientifically, using some infrastructure or some architecture to underpin the techniques, in particular.
So would it be safe to say that you needed the music to keep the aesthetic, but ultimately it was married to the linearity of the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, the narrative,
like level game sort of geometry.
the narrative drove it much more, I think, than the geometry. And if I could improve one thing, I think it would have been to have a bit more. We have there's a soundtrack, you can buy it. It's over an hour of music, and that's cutting down. So we had actually maybe more like an hour and a half of music in the game, and like we said, it's like a 5-hour game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty good ratio. There's a lot of games that do a lot less than that, but a lot of that
famously,
is
Super Mario Brothers has like what loops that.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing. It's like not only did we make a game, we made it like a double album, basically.
Yeah.
Which is hard. It's hard to make that much music. But a lot of it was predicated on the narrative aspect. And, in a certain sense, actually, when you listen to the soundtrack, you realize it's almost like a bit like this album, Drug Use. I don't know if you know this album.
No, I'm going to look it up, though.
Fantastic album. I think it is. If I could, once again, I'll make a controversial statement. I think it's the best IDM album ever made.
How do I spell that?
You can't.
How do I find that?
Just look up Aphex Twin.
It's an Aphex Twin.
Oh, okay,
album.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Should have guessed it was Aphex Twin.
But so the awesome thing he did, and this was not intentional, but looking back, I realized there was this weird parallel with that album, which is that album is this album of IDM, Twitch electronic music that's doing like, especially like early 2000s, really glitch, but it has a sentimentality to it, and in particular, he tied that sentimentality back to something. It was a very interesting choice. He ended up writing a whole series of small pieces for mechanically controlled prepared piano. So it's an actual prepared piano. So in case people don't know, prepared piano, what that means is a piano where you literally have put junk in the strings. You put like pieces of metal or rubber, such that when you press a key, it makes a percussion sound. And it makes you realize that the piano is a percussion instrument. It's not a string instrument, in the sense it's not bowed. It's hammers hitting a string, and this sounds like a drum or something. So he wrote a set of these small pieces that were mechanically controlled in this fashion. So anyways, this album, ours, for this game, ended up having a kind of similar thing where it ended up being like a very, I think, sincere, a very sentimental musical landscape. And in particular, one instrument became very prominent, which was the guitar, because there's this character, Tal, who's a guitarist, and he's a very important character in the game. And so guitar ended up being a very important instrument for the music. And so a lot of the music is based on guitar. It's either solo guitar music, or it will be processed guitar. So there's a lot of processed strings. You may not even realize it. A lot of this stuff, it's like I don't necessarily expect somebody who's listening to understand, oh, this is obviously derived from a guitar. It's more like there's this, in the same way that I don't fundamentally understand like the weak force, like the weak nuclear force or something, whenever I go to touch something and then my hand stops, right? But I get in a kind of general abstracted sense that there's this interaction that's occurring. And that's what this is on the level of, is like, that's why I'm saying abstraction is more important. So the guitar aspects of it and the processing of the guitar aspects ended up being a launching pad for how we could compose, right? And it ended up shaping the direction of what ended up being composed in the end. So it ended up being a whole album, really, of kind of electronic, strange guitar music, even though a lot of it, if you listen to, you wouldn't necessarily know that.
Interesting. That's really cool. I mean, now I'm going to have to pay more attention to the music as well. But yeah, I mean, I really respect the primacy of the narrative and how far you went on sort of, this is not to downplay the importance, but just like a more niche element as far as like what the average person's gonna like notice. They'll obviously process it, and you clearly have thought about what it means for someone to experience the game, but like sadly, score is not a thing most people pay attention to, or maybe that's a good thing because then you get to do things with it because they aren't paying explicit attention. That might be the charitable read to the average person, but like it matters a lot, and it can pull you out of a game, and to have that dedication on keeping the narrative on track in multiple ways is super interesting. Before we wrap up on the soundtrack, and so it's a puzzle game which has sort of loops and things that change the world, and obviously some people will progress through a puzzle at different paces. How did you tackle the inherent sort of dynamicism of the world and the timing with the music?
I would say in a very simple way. If this was a different game, I think that we may have thought about trying to make something more sophisticated. And spoiler alert, for the next game we make, that might end up being something that's more of a concern. But for this game, because it's so segmented and the segmentations are so clear, it gave us a really strong push to frame them musically different. And then really it just became a question of, okay, within a certain kind of play mode, a certain kind of experience, what is our concern about what we're trying to achieve? And sometimes those things are a little bit more curated and a little bit more predictable about what they're trying to say and how long it's going to take.
Right.
And other times it's a little bit more open-ended, like the puzzle solving sections, in which case, there's a few ways you can go about. One way is to make some very complicated system that tries to like interact with what they're doing exactly in the puzzles and changes the music or something. And certainly we've made things like that. But I think for us, we decided we were taking on so much that we just keep it simple. So our solution was we just made long enough loops that we felt like most people probably get through the thing that we're trying to get them through without hearing it loop. Or if it does loop, then it's not.
They won't notice. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say actually in the spheres of soundtracks and sound design and music composition, there's actually a bit of a some people look down on if you try to mimic these kind of small interactions too much, and there's a term for it. We call it Mickey Mousing. Yeah. So if you're Mickey Mousing, yes. That's like in Fantasia, where there's a little marimba hit every time Mickey Mouse takes a step.
Right.
And we're going to go up because, he's going up the stairs, so the pitches are going to go up. And when he goes down the stairs, when he falls down, it's going to sound like, we're going to do glissando down.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So we call that Mickey Mousing, and the reason is because what you're doing is you're depicting physical, immediate, superficial elements, right? Where it's considered to be a little bit better if what you're doing is you're working, at a higher level of abstraction, where it's like, okay, yeah, I understand he's going upstairs.
Yeah.
But is that the most does that have the most primacy at this moment?
Why are you using an orchestra to do Foley?
Sure, exactly. So, that's the thing you have to balance. I think in games, especially because there's technology, there's like Fmod and WYs, and if we wanted to get super techy, technically we wrote a whole programming language to write all the music in this game. We wrote a programming language called Necronomicon. It's open source on GitHub. You can go make your own music with it, based on Lucid and Super Collider. But at the end of the day, that stuff doesn't really matter, and the stuff that we were trying to do and capture was kind of like at a higher level of abstraction. So, I think Chad's right. It ended up being kind of, I think mostly there are kind of two modes of expression, which is that there are these more open modes of expression where the player is doing something where they have more agency in the world, and then there are these more kind of structured moments,
right? And
they were more composed, right? They're more like a traditional composition, and in fact, they're so composed. Even the sound design is composed. I would say that the sound design and the music is indistinct. There's no difference. They're the same thing to us.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, there are moments like the memories in particular.
They're just all soundscape.
It's all soundscape.
Right.
In fact, there's some that made it into the soundtrack because it was just like, yeah, this is the sound of the music.
Oh, super interesting. Right. So you literally saw it as the same place, and so obviously you taking it out would be, it wouldn't make sense. Oh, that's really cool. Okay. Sorry, I'm just like super nerding out and realizing that I'm supposed to be hosting a podcast that's been going longer than anticipated.
I
but
feel like we
that's
could
usually
talk
what
forever.
happens.
I see you on Twitter liking Magic the Gathering stuff all the time, and I feel like, man, I would love to talk to you just about that for a couple
Oh, really?
hours.
Oh, man.
I feel like we'd have a lot to say about it, but I understand we have limited time.
Yeah, I mean, I recently got back. Oh, so here's the thing. I've been playing Magic since 95, and then I took a break from 2000 to 2010. And then when I moved to Europe, I didn't know anyone, so I didn't play. And then in the pandemic, my friends got back into it, and I kind of went Magic crazy. But I have so many thoughts about Magic the Gathering. Anyway,
yeah, we're old school.
We've been playing it for just
started...
I think 95 or 96. I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
I think the Dark maybe was the first set that we.
Oh, the Dark is so good. Okay, I mean, I'm gonna leave this in, but did you get a chance to play? Do you guys play Limited?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
These days, that's
I
my
have to say, I have.
way.
This is one of the things that would be interesting to discuss. Is I've come to the game and left it multiple times.
I think we all have.
I have to admit that now I'm at a period of having been gone from it for a couple years.
If you have like 6 to 8 people who will play Magic the Gathering with you, find Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and draft it. It's one of the best limited environments I've played. It's really good. What was the last one? New Capenna. I'm less happy with, but it's fine.
I really enjoyed Dominaria, but after that, it was kind of like, and then I kind of stopped.
Yeah, Throne of Eldraine, we did. I thought the limited of Throne of Eldraine was great.
Oh, but that's because it's one of the most ridiculous sets that's ever been made. It is so
yeah. I mean,
overpowered.
Constructed was silly, right?
Oh,
but, Limited was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the benefit of Limited, right? It's like it can be the most busto set, and it's in its own microcosm, so it's okay. But yeah, I mean, I really like Limited because I mean, it's the notion of like restrictions breed innovation, which is why I like Limited, which is why I initially liked Commander and don't like it as much anymore. Because
I enjoy Commander every now and then as a more of I treat it like a board game, right? It's like I don't invest myself in the game in the same way. It's more of just a group thing.
I think that's the best way to do it. It's just, I guess the problem is if your play group cares about staples or new powerful things, it becomes just like I liked it when it was I have these cards, he says, grabbing a random stack of Magic the Gathering because he's within reach.
Like some weird,
and then you're like, I'll make a singleton deck based on this, right? That's fine. It's when like basically when Wizards started making cards for Commander is when it started being problematic. This has been a real pleasure. Recursive Ruin is on Steam. It's out. Play the demo, buy the game and the soundtrack, which I just learned about. If the listeners wanted to talk to you guys directly or find out more about your aforementioned but not discussed next project, where would they stay tuned to?
Probably the best to just get information would probably be Twitter. So Recursive Ruin on Twitter, or Dr. Chad McKinney or Dr. Kurt McKinney are going to be big places. You can also jump into our Discord. We're part of the Iceberg Interactive Discord. So jump into there, and I will always, I'm always on there. You can always ask me questions. You know, people do. Sometimes I highly encourage you to throw in a behemoth emoticon.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's probably the best way to see what we're up to.
Awesome. Anything to add, Chet?
You can also follow our studio at BitRock Games on Twitter. Yeah.
Awesome. And as always, you can find us at Tanked Up Cast, myself at the Omniarch, Ben and Lucy at GCLease9 and Nova_47, and all the things we do here at Out of Lives at outoflives.net or Out of Lives Network on all the things. If you're watching this on YouTube, which I haven't figured out how I'm going to make that work, like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things, but also generally, post about us, comment below, share. That way we can have more wonderful guests like Chad and Curtis and continue doing this podcast and also help pay for some of our beers. I mean, let's be honest, that's part of the shtick. This has been Tanked Up for yet another week. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
www.outoflives.net.
Hi.